Holly Spangler was a 19-year-old young woman with long blonde curly hair and a big smile. In 1992, she moved from her rural Wisconsin hometown to pursue a career in architectural design. She attended the Northwest Technical Institute in Eden Prairie, a suburb outside of Minneapolis. Holly was a hard worker. On the side, she was employed at Menards, a large-scale hardware store. She was reliable and well-liked by her colleagues. And that's why, when Holly didn't show up for her shift on a July morning in the summer of 1993, her coworkers knew something was wrong. Her roommates did too. On July 15th, Holly told her roommates she was headed out to a party, and she didn't return home. It was unusual for the dedicated college student, and that's when family members, coworkers, and friends began to worry. In the midst of that worry and concern, 5 days after Holly went missing, a local resident called in to the Bloomington Police Department to report that a 1991 black Pontiac Le Mans had been parked and vacant for days at Moore Park in Bloomington, also a suburb outside of Minneapolis. The vehicle matched the description of Holly's vehicle. And so began the search. Holly's body was discovered in that park with a single stab wound to the chest on July 20th, 1993. Reports from the time indicated there was no evidence of sexual assault, though it was difficult to find any official autopsy records to verify that. After 5 days of being exposed to the elements, her body was in a state of decomposition. There wasn't much evidence discovered nearby, and despite a lot of work being done by Bloomington PD on this case, ultimately, Holly's case went cold. Now, one Bloomington detective, Kristen Boomer, is hoping she can crack the case, put an end to the mysterious death, and deliver a sense of peace to Holly's friends and family. You're listening to The Vault. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. This is part 1 on the Holly Spangler murder. When the lead detective on the Holly Spangler case retired earlier this year, Detective Boomer took the opportunity to step in where other detectives had left off. She volunteered to take over the Holly Spangler case. Unlike the detectives who had dedicated themselves to this case throughout the years, Detective Boomer had an added advantage on her side: advanced DNA technology. Solving a cold case is difficult, and even more challenging with a lack of evidence. Locked away in the Bloomington Police Department are the minimal items that were collected at the scene of Holly's death, but they do include her clothing she was wearing when her body was discovered. When Detective Boomer took on Holly's case, she knew she was facing an uphill battle that could benefit from outside expertise. So she looked for help from those who have solved cold cases in the past. She discovered a series of national conferences aimed at helping departments like hers solve cold cases. The conferences are led by the nation's leading homicide investigators. Detective Boomer knew an opportunity to present Holly Spangler's case could be the key to solving it. So she made it happen. Here's Detective Boomer.
I mean, when I say little to no evidence, I mean, when you have a house, you have evidence within that house. And you're able to collect things from the scene. There was almost nothing collected from the scene in this case, except for the body. And so when you have something like that and it's been 30 years, where do you start? Like, what's a good starting place? So I said, send me to this conference.
Boomer submitted a proposal to present the Holly Spangler case, and it was accepted. So she packed up the large case file she had combed through time and time again, and she traveled to Texas with a colleague to hit the stage.
And there was agencies from all over the United States. I mean, we had Seattle, Arizona, we had some East Coast, a lot of Texas, but a couple from Wisconsin, And then myself and one of my partners here went. And they, before the conference, they solicited cold cases to potentially present to the class to gather information. And so I sent mine in saying, hey, I'm new to working cold cases. Here's my case. What do you think? They let me present it, and I basically just gave, some of the details and the facts of the case surrounding Holly's reported disappearance and then the finding of her body and a little bit of what was done. And everybody sat in the room and just started shouting out, it was kind of this big session of everybody just kind of raising their hands and saying, hey, this is what I would do. Hey, this worked in my agency and that kind of thing. And my partner took notes. So it was about a 45-minute session where I got a ton of information from people down there of what they have done and what's worked for them and what hasn't.
One of those suggestions surrounded a new DNA technology known as MVAC. MVAC is essentially a new tool that uses wet vacuum technology to extract very small samples of DNA from porous surfaces, clothing, for example. This new technology allows scientists to collect DNA samples that weren't previously accessible through swabbing techniques, which would have been used in cases like Holly's in the 1990s. As I mentioned earlier, Holly's case did lack significant evidence, but the Bloomington Police Department does still have her clothes, sealed and safe. But here's the thing about MVAC technology. It's expensive. Utilizing the technology can come with a price tag of up to tens of thousands of dollars, and that can be a problem, even for a large police department like the Bloomington PD. It is, after all, a public department, and funding isn't falling from the sky.
There's costs involved with everything. Nobody does this for free. Like genetic genealogy, for example, if we were going to use something like that, like say I get a sample and then I wanted to send something into one of the genetic genealogy labs. There's several labs out there that do this genetic genealogy for us. It can run $7,000 to $10,000 just for them to do the testing. So departments we have to find that money.
Despite the price, Detective Boomer isn't giving up. There are grants and other opportunities out there, but she's not going to just sit around and wait. Before she's able to utilize new DNA technology services like MVAC, she's turning back the clock 3 decades and re-examining the case.
My thought and my process is to start right at the beginning again and start in Holly's inner circle and work the way out. That's kind of whenever you have a victim who has been, unfortunately, the victim of a death or something like this, you usually start with the people who were closest and you work your way out of that circle. There are people in the case that I want to re-interview. I just haven't gotten to that point yet.
That means family members, close friends, roommates, coworkers. From there, she'll expand the circle and follow the leads. Not many people in Minnesota know about Holly Spangler's case, but if they've heard of it, it's likely because it has been tied to Donald Bloom, the notorious killer who kidnapped and murdered Katie Poyer in the 90s. Katie Poyer was working at a gas station in Moose Lake, Minnesota at the time she was abducted. The story was huge. Donald Bloom was arrested and charged with Katie's murder after remnants of her teeth were found in a burn pit on his property, near where Katie had been taken. That happened in 1999, and as investigators looked into Donald Bloom, they realized he had a long rap sheet. By the time he got to Katie Poyer, he had 6 felony convictions under his belt, 5 of them related to sexual assault and kidnapping. And at the time Holly was left for dead in the Bloomington Park, Donald Bloom lived nearby, under a different name. You've been listening to The Vault. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. The Vault's editor is Jeremy Fugelberg. The Vault is a Forum Communications podcast. All stories can be found online at inforum.com/thevault. To support our work, subscribe to The Vault and gain access to documents and images related to the cases we cover. In part 2 of the Holly Spangler murder, we'll examine Donald Bloom, the suspect, and what Detective Boomer thinks of his alleged role in Holly's death.